What's going on, everyone? This is Physical Education with Coach, and I am Coach Cullen Carroll. What I wanted to do today was give you a little bit of a perspective from what was happening on my end with the physical education program at my school. And there might be a little bit of an emotion involved, as we can tell, because we're reporting psychological data here. So I wanted you to give a view of my face as well. I think it's more friendly that way rather than just looking at a group of slides. So the first thing I want to do for you is tell you what we're reporting here. In the fall, we implemented a new strategy called a preparedness or a wellness survey. And I also tried to do a better job with data collection as it pertained to the physical aspect of physical education. So if you can put a label on this, what we were trying to do was teach students about themselves by creating a more holistic physical education program at Banning High School. And so as you can see by the title, we're looking at performance data and we're also looking at psychological data. We don't want to forget that not only as educators but as coaches, our goal isn't to just develop people physically, it's to develop them socially and emotionally as well. And what better way to do that than to help students learn about themselves, learn about what's going on inside their heads. And that helps me learn if they're ready to train for the day, and then for the month, and then for the semester, and for the school year. I can start to look at these trends and understand what's going to be the best physical activity or fitness routine for my general population. So just right off the bat, I want to lay out my basic structure for you guys. At the beginning of class, my students log in. They don't have to have their cameras on for the first 5 minutes. I want them to fill out their wellness survey, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in a second here. After the survey, I have a warm-up video that they follow along. I like to call it the Jane Fonda style, because what happens is I made a series of videos, as you can tell by my channel here, and while the students are performing the activities following along with the video, I have the privilege of being able to chime in and help correct some of those faulty movements or encourage the students, rather than me being challenged by leading a workout and trying to manage a classroom. This makes it a lot easier for us as coaches to focus most of our time on qualitative analysis, which is very, very important when it comes to physical education. A lot of times we just focus on numbers and not on quality of movement. Well, this gave me the opportunity to focus on quality of movement, and I've seen a lot of changes here, and I'm going to show you that when it comes to the performance data at the end of this presentation. So the warm-up, the workout, and the cool-down are all done by the same fashion, right? There's a video that I prepared for the students. The warm-up, there's 7 different progressions of the warm-up, so we fluctuate based on what I think they're prepared for the day, an easier to a more difficult warm-up. Same thing with the workouts. We have specific focus areas depending on the class. Just to lay out a general series for you, we have push-up series, we have curl-up series, and those are all pertaining to the fitnessgram testing, so you see those more with PE1 and PE2. I still think fitnessgram is important to test with PE2 because we're still teaching those kids general fitness. And then we have different styles of videos for PE3 depending on the focus, right? So I have a lot of weight training videos teaching progressions with a PVC pipe or a broomstick, because I want those kids to learn to lift properly, but also in order for them to learn to lift properly, you have to have a series of progressions and regressions built in. So a lot of mine focuses around the Olympic lifting movements, the snatch, the clean, and the jerk. And I do like to break those 3 up into 3 separate categories, even though they're traditionally as 2. This gives me a little more content for the students. Also, it decreases the complexity and it makes it more simple for students to be able to learn the different isolated pieces before they put them together. And so as you can imagine, within, if we're going through some of those series, for the push-up series, for example, you would imagine that starts with a lot of shoulder stability, that starts with a lot of core stability. So as you can imagine, in series 1, we're doing a lot of planking, we're doing a lot of push-up hold positions, and then as you progress to the end, you start to see more advanced progressions like close grip push-ups, wide grip push-ups, feet elevated push-ups, and isometric holds in different positions to make it more challenging. Whereas for the weightlifting classes, the weightlifting series videos, you might start with just a pulling series, learning to pull the bar from the floor. You might start with just a pressing series, and then as you typically progress those movements, you would see them get faster, become more explosive. You integrate jumping, you integrate turning the bar over onto the shoulders or overhead, whatever it may be. And you can start to see, if you check out some of these series, the progressions of the movement. So that's how it works for warm-up, workout, and cool down, which is essentially flexibility for our school, because we like to focus on a lot of static stretching towards the end of the workout, being that there are multiple tests that we test for flexibility, and there's multiple associations between flexibility and long-term health. Then at the end of their workout, they revisit their wellness survey and they answer a couple of questions. Again, I'm going to go through what those questions are. I just want to vaguely state that here. So every day we perform our survey. Every 6 weeks we perform our physical fitness testing. We try to get through about 3 trials of physical fitness testing per semester. I think that's good enough. If you have a pre, middle, and post, you can typically get some good trends as to what's happening with your PE program, and that can really affect the programming and the periodization of your workouts. The last thing I wanted to state, trust me, I know my limitations. I know I'm working with kids here who barely know themselves, but I did grab a good variety of data for this data set. And what we're looking at is grades 9 to 12, and we're looking at not only PE1 and PE2 classes, but we have 2 different PE3 classes. And for those of you that don't know, first year PE and second year PE are very similar. A lot of focus on just general body weight exercise, aerobic workouts, and sometimes dual and team sports. Whereas PE3 is something that you select to participate in on your own. So I have 2 periods of PE3 strength and conditioning, and I have 1 period of PE3 aerobics. So those are very contrasted concepts, very contrasted classes. And what I just wanted to point out here is that we have a very large heterogeneous data set. Okay, we have some of these classes are all females, some of these classes are all males, and that's not by us breaking them up that way. That's just basically by the choice of the students. PE1 and PE2 are very well mixed in terms of gender, and then PE3 classes, you could see the males and the females like to take a completely different direction in their fitness journey. So really, I just want to state for you in our introduction here where I got the idea from. I came across a paper this year when I was thinking about implementing a wellness survey. And again, this is one of my major limitations. Our wellness survey was ultimately created for professional, they call them footballers. Okay, in our country we would refer to them as soccer players. And these are people from the United Kingdom region, so they're just on the west side of Europe, on a couple of those islands out there. So we're thinking about not only a different geographic region, a different cultural aspect, depending on where they're from, as well as a different cultural aspect, because these are elite level athletes. So that's one of the major limitations we're looking at here. Because remember, we are talking about kids age 13, 14, up to 18, 19 years old when we're looking at my data set. And these people that are playing football or soccer in our country, especially at the elite level, they tend to be slightly older than that, sometimes up in their 20s and 30s, so they have a better social emotional grasp of what they're feeling. Now, in this study, the most profound feature that I pulled out of it was that they filled out these wellness surveys, and it was essentially on par with what the intensity or the requirement for effort for the workout was for the day. So my thoughts were, I wonder if I could get PE students to give a preparedness score for the day to tell me what kind of workout they are ready for the day. And can this maybe bleed over a little bit into academics and tell us how prepared they are for a difficult assignment Or do they need an easy assignment for the day? Is this something that we can look on a grand scale in the school and determine all teachers should maybe take it easy on the students for the day, or we should push the students and give them a little bit of vigor for the day? Now, this is obviously on a smaller scale because I'm at a high school, and this data is just coming from PE students prior to their PE workouts. So keep that in mind. So here was the survey that they created for those athletes, and I also adapted this same survey for our students at Banning High School. You'll see there are 6 different categories in the wellness questionnaire, and there are 5 different scores for each of the category. Now, each of the scores is associated with a number. So if we're looking at the first one here, mood state, we look at a 1 being very bad. That's what I tell the students when I associate it with their language. A 2 being bad, a 3 being somewhere in the middle, a 4 being good, and a 5 being very good. So I broke it down with that language, but obviously there's much more description in some of those categories, as we can see when we look at this matrix here. So I want to come back and then go to the data set for you so we can keep this less confusing as possible. Here's what our average mood scores were for fall of 2020. Now you can see we started, most of the scores hang around 3, obviously, because you have students that are going to report high scores and you have students that are going to report low scores on average. But what we have here is just the progression of our data set month by month, culminating in a score at the very end of our graph over there. So on the far right side of the graph, we see the average mood score for the semester, which was about 3.67 if you click on the data point there. But you can see that the mood scores started low in August. They got a little bit better come September. They got a little bit worse come October. They got much worse than the beginning of the year come November, and then they went back up for December, probably because kids knew they were going on Christmas break. And that culminated in a score, as I said, of about 3.67 for the semester. Let's look at sleep quality. Okay, once again, 1 is bad, 3 is reasonable, 5 is great. Here's our graph for the beginning of the year. That's a pretty poor sleep score at the beginning of the year, but we can probably explain that, being that students are coming off summer vacation, they don't sleep, they probably play a lot of video games, stay out late with their friends, and then they have to adapt to a schedule, which is what we saw from the data set, right? They were able to make that adaptation, they were able to change their schedule, and then we see pretty even keel scores between 3.4 and 3.45 on average, and that slightly decreased as we moved towards December, as well as with the semester average. However, it wasn't as bad as it was in the beginning, which is good. Let's take a look at energy levels. 1, no energy at all. 3, reasonable. 5, full of energy. 2 and 4 are somewhere in between. Energy levels fluctuated. All right, it was up and down every other month, which I think is a more natural pattern, right? And we could probably say this is one of our best reported scores here. I think it was one of our more reliable scores because of that up and down nature going month to month. We see it was very poor in the beginning, right, between 3.35 and 3.4. Then it went up to the highest score, which was in September. And then we saw some nice little fluctuations between 3.4 and 3.45 for the next couple months. And then we saw our average being between 3.4 and 3.45. Now let's take a look at muscle soreness. This one I think was the most challenging for students. It is based off of feel, right? We're not taking any kind of advanced measures to determine if their muscles are extremely sore. So I think a lot of students were just learning to gauge this response this year. I don't think a lot of them were asked about soreness previously. So you have 1 being extremely sore, 3 being quite sore, and 5 being not sore at all. And that gave us a graph that looked like this, right? In the beginning, a lot of soreness. Okay, it was a much lower number, meaning that they were more sore. And as we increased throughout the semester, The workouts are pretty similar, like I said, just little mini progressions here and there. You see an adaptation. So we should see the students become less sore as they're becoming more physically active more frequently. And that's what we saw. We saw a little dip in November, but that dip recovered with a big increase in December, and that resulted in a semester average that was higher than the initial month, which I'm looking for again. Let's talk about diet. Again, this is one I think that's very challenging for students at our level. Not just based on their socioeconomic situation, which we have not touched on at all, but I think kids at this age don't reflect on diet as much. The way that this diet score works is not did you eat or did you not eat. It is depend on the quality of food. Okay, so 1 is pretty much that everything you ate was low quality. A lot of processed food, a lot of sodas, not a ton of water, not a ton of fruit and veggies. 3 was somewhere in the middle. You ate half natural foods and you ate half processed foods. And then 5, the way I told them was if you felt like everything you ate was natural for the day, and you didn't eat a lot of chips, you didn't eat a lot of processed candies, you didn't drink any sodas, then that's gonna be a 5 for you for the day. And realize that a 5 for a high school kid is probably going to be a lot different than a 5 for an adult, because like I said, they don't reflect on this stuff a lot. So here's what our diet looked like, and I was pretty proud of this one. It showed an increase from August to an average higher score for the semester, and I'm proud of that. Again, we have some little fluctuations in the middle, but I think that that's a more natural score, which again told me that there's a possibility that this was a more valid score than some of the rest of them as well. And then the last one we have is stress, which I expected to be all over the place because, like I said, I didn't mention the socioeconomic status of my students, but that can be a big factor with stress. Academic stress, family stress. There's a lot that can be factored into what causes us to be stressed out, on top of the fact that I'm asking them to change their entire exercise routine and work out every single day, something that they probably haven't done for quite a while coming off the COVID quarantine. So 1 would be highly stressed, 3 would be reasonable, and 5 would be very relaxed, almost no stress. Let's take a look at our graph here. Well, what was interesting to me here is the first month was obviously the lowest amount of stress. And that culminated in a higher average, which is positive according to our wellness score. But one of the things I did not appreciate was the fact that it increased in September, it stayed about the same in October, and then those stress levels started to come down. I wondered if I was pushing them a little bit too much with physical education. So then I tried to take a larger picture of what was occurring with our data set here. And I essentially laid all the scores over each other, and I wanted to see what our most troublesome features of our wellness survey was. So as we look towards the top there, we see mood and we see sleep. They're in a pretty good position, I think. They're over the halfway mark, which means they're moving towards a more positive score of 4 and 5. Then we look somewhere in the middle. We have energy levels, we have soreness levels. Again, they're trending positively. But when I look at the bottom 2 scores, diet and stress level, which I think schools have the ability to control as much as they can, given legislation and public funding, obviously, when we're talking about public schools, they seem to be trending downward. One thing I don't want to do with my students is increase their stress levels, especially if we're not meeting their dietary needs. That is one of the fundamental needs of a student prior to learning, prior to physical education, prior to just about anything you do in your life. We need to decrease stress levels, and we need to make sure they're well fed. We're meeting some of the needs of most of these students as they're reporting here, and these are self-reported scores, so again, keep that limitation in mind. But these are all privately reported scores. I didn't save any of their names. I didn't save any of their student ID numbers because I wanted them to have the discretion to report how they truly felt, so that when I reported this to the next level above me, administration, district, they could see how these students truly felt on a daily basis. And like I said, that was my sole purpose for this semester, was teaching kids to learn more about their internal environment and not just focus on the physical aspect of physical education. Now there's 3 more things that we reported on the wellness survey that I want to show you guys today. One of them was the resting heart rate. One of them was the post-exercise heart rate. And then the last one is what's called a rate of perceived exertion, and I'm going to show you what that looks like after I go over the heart rate. So at the beginning of the semester, when I introduced the wellness survey to our kids, I taught each and every single one of them how to measure their heart rate just by their radial pulse. Right? I made a video, I made a written walkthrough, and I did a class solely dedicated to that, as well as if students needed time, I made time to teach every individual one how to do that. Typically when you have a resting heart rate, adapting to exercise, we see a decrease. Now for the first couple months, we saw a rise, probably due to a change in stress, right? And this is a stress to the physical environment, not to the mental environment. Could have an effect as well. But I think one of the profound features that our exercise program worked in an online environment was that we saw a decrease from August to the end of the semester, right? It's a small decrease, a couple of decimal points, but it is there. And then when we look at the individual months, and this is a complete data set, I promise that I did not throw any incomplete sets in here, we see a decrease over the months if we're looking individually at them. That's a big deal. That is a major adaptation of the cardiovascular system to an exercise routine, is to decrease the resting heart rate. This one got a little bit messy, post-exercise heart rate. We saw a pretty even display of post-exercise heart rate for the first 3 months. And then we saw a big peak in November, which probably shows that this data set was either slightly error-ridden or we started to see kids truly pushing themselves to a higher intensity and possibly measuring at the correct time where they could have not been measuring at the correct time in the first couple months. Like I said, this was a little bit of a learning curve for these students. The last score, as I mentioned, was the rate of perceived exertion. And very simply put, a rate of perceived exertion is your psychological perspective of how difficult the workout was. This is what really caused me to look and see if the stress levels from our students were coming from physical activity or if they were coming from sources surrounding them, such as family, academic, social stress. A lot of these types of stresses that seem to plague our students, especially at a young age. 1 would be very light activity, 4 to 6 moderate, 7 to 8 vigorous activity, which is where the majority of physical education is supposed to occur, okay, between 4 and 8. And 10 would be maximum. I always tell my students, 10 is if you feel like you're going to die, you can't continue any longer, that's when you would write that. I did not know this until the end. But apparently, the physical education that I was offering was not that vigorous, right? Let's go back to what the scores were. 2 to 3, 4 to 6 is light to moderate. That's a lot of what I was receiving. And a lot of what helped me realize, well, I can increase the stress a little bit. So that was the first big learning curve that I got from this. But also, it made me realize that our students need some stress management skills, right? Because a lot of the stress that they're getting is not coming from PE. And I strictly implemented this wellness survey. I watched them do it every single day just to make sure that we were offering the correct amount of physical stress as well as I was helping them learn about their emotional stress. Now, where that comes from, I'm not sure. But as you can tell, the amount of intense perception here, or the amount of effort that was required, slowly decreased throughout the course of the semester. And like I mentioned before, this could come from two completely different sides of the spectrum. Either students were adapting to the workouts that I was providing, and so they became less difficult, or the students were still trying to grasp how to emotionally perceive these workouts. Either way, we saw a decrease, which again, like I mentioned, showed me that they were ready for more stress in the following semester. Now, that's all the emotional side of the data. Let's take a quick look at how our students performed physically. I think, as we could imagine, physical activity in an online environment is very difficult to come by, which is why I said I created a YouTube channel in order to have them follow along with videos so I could be more of a motivator and a coach rather than a leader of the specific workouts. I think that's important. This is what we call the performance profile in physical education. I briefly alluded to this at the beginning, saying we do physical fitness tests and we try to accomplish them 3 times per semester, which accumulates to about 6 tests per year, which is a pretty good illustration of changes over the course of a semester and over the course of a year. What you'll see here is our fall phases. So we tested 3 times, as I mentioned, once in September, once in November, and once in December for finals week. We looked at certain anthropometrics such as weight, height, and then our sheet here that's designed for each individual student will automatically calculate the BMI for the student. Then we have some muscle endurance and strength testing, anything from push-ups to modified pull-ups. Inverted rows is another name for them. Flexed arm hangs for people that cannot accomplish the first 2 tests. We have curl-ups, obviously, for the trunk. We have trunk lift, sit and reach, and shoulder stretch. I throw trunk lift in the flexibility mobility category, even though trunk lift claims to be a test of torso strength as well. I'm not going to spend time combating that right now, but I think it fits more in the flexibility mobility category. And then we have the 3 aerobic tests, which is where we witnessed a lot of our changes. We have the 1 mile run, the 1 mile walk, and the pacer, which you're probably going, how did you do a pacer with 60 kids online? Well, what I did is I actually taught them how to design a course for the pacer. So I designed a 20-meter course for them. I taught them how to use a tape measure and set up that said course. And then what I did was I turned it into a Cooper's test. And if you don't know what a Cooper's test is, that's a 12-minute run with a heart rate measurement at the end. And so ultimately what it became was our modified pacer. And it was set up your course, set a clock for 12 minutes, run as many laps, pacer laps as you can in 12 minutes. I know that's not an exact pacer, but I do call it the modified pacer, and I want you guys to know I'm not claiming it to be the actual pacer. At the bottom, you see a bunch of difference calculators. I programmed that in for myself, as well as for the students to be able to witness their changes without having to do any mathematical calculations. But I do walk them through how to type all these formulas into Excel, because I do try to give a little bit of cross-curricular education in my PE classes. I think that's important. Let's take a look at some of these stats. So the reason I implement anthropometrics is not just for the fitnessgram. At this age, there are a lot of biological changes occurring, and I want students to understand that some of that biological adaptation could be occurring just because they are growing. So what we saw, and I don't know how this happened because I imagined that this would be completely different. My hypothesis was that weight gain would go through the roof. I thought height would increase, and I thought BMI would go through the roof also. We actually saw a decrease in the average body weight of our students from 156 down to 154 at the end of the semester. And actually, there was a bigger change for the first to the second phase. We saw an increase in height. I think that's normal. It's a small increase, but as you can notice, it's about, I don't know, 1 or 2 inches. Sorry, not 1 or 2 inches, 1 or 2, like a quarter of an inch. But I think that's still very profound. I had some students that grew 2 and 3 inches. And then this is the one that was most shocking to me. Again, it's a very small decrease, but 0.3 decrease in BMI points. I think that's very profound to be able to achieve a decrease in BMI and body weight in an online environment. I don't think anybody foresaw that happening. And so I'm very proud of my students to be able to manage that. Now, I think these push-up scores are a little inflated because they are moderated by the parents and the guardians, but they still are self-reported, and we all know that self-reporting is prone to error. I do critique them on their form before they go to do the tests, so I do check for form, number one, and number two, I also teach them about errors that could end the test. So I do try to give them all the data, all the information available, prior to them administering these tests. We saw an increase in push-up numbers from phase 1 all the way to phase 3. We saw an increase in modified pull-up. Again, that's the inverted row, laying perpendicular to the bar, underneath the bar, parallel to the ground, and pulling your chest up to the bar. When we look at flexed arm hang, we saw an increase in the amount of seconds that students were able to do the increased arm hang, students were able to do the flexed arm hang for an increased amount of time. We saw an increase in the number of curl-ups. I think this was the most accurate score, one of the most accurate scores that I saw when I looked through the entire data set. I did not see a lot of large numbers or inflated, what I deemed inflated numbers or outliers. This was very consistent from student to student. I think they were comfortable reporting this one. We saw a small increase in the average trunk lift, which again, like I was saying, I think fits better in the flexibility mobility category. But also it could have showed that we had increases in strength as well. We had an increase in the average sit and reach, only about 1.5 inches, but it's good enough to show. Here's where it started to get a little crazy. I wasn't shocked by this. In fact, when I sat down and administered the first set of testing for phase 1, my initial thought was we're going to see a big increase in mile run times. And my thought was because we're only going to get a couple of kids that run the mile, and also kids aren't going to move. They're just going to get worse as the semester goes on because kids don't like to run. And I see this when I'm in school too. This is not something I just see while I'm sitting here at home talking to kids about not running. Kids don't like to run in school as well. In fact, if I gave you the number one test that we do for aerobic across all levels, PE 1, 2, and 3, probably about 5% of the kids want to run the mile. And about 90% of the kids want to run the pacer, which shocks me. And then about another 5% want to do the mile walk. So this wasn't that shocking to me. But you do see we had a massive increase in mile run times, which could be a big cause for concern. And I say that because, hey, the other scores look great. We're decreasing our weight, we're decreasing our BMI, which are the first 2 steps to getting healthier. We're increasing our muscle strength, awesome. But this really worries me that we're seeing a large decrease in aerobic capability, right? Because our lungs, because our heart is so important when it comes to our physiology, okay? And I didn't say this back at the beginning, but some of the things that lead to longevity, long-term life, long-term health, one of the main factors is VO2 max, okay? And VO2 max is heavily driven by heart and lung functionality. If we're decreasing our heart and lung functionality, that could be a negative factor. That being said, BMI is important. We did show a decrease in BMI. We did show an increase in upper body strength. I didn't have a test for lower body strength, so I can't give you that number. So there's a good possibility that we have no change or a decrease in lower body strength and no change or a decrease in aerobic. And that's two of the major factors for longevity that we're looking at here that we did not perform well in. Those are two aspects that we can still have detrimental health effects from because we did not focus on them very well. However, in our other aerobic tests, we did show some improvements. So like I said, I do like to see an improvement in the running times, even though it doesn't shock me that we got worse. We did see an improvement in the walk. I'm proud of that. Okay, about 2 minutes of improvement, a little more than 2 minutes of improvement in the mile walk times. I loved that because what it showed me, and also students communicated this with me, was that students started to appreciate one of the most basic tenets of physical activity, which was going for walks. And to some extent, students would ask for a break from PE for the day from me, and they would change their attitude from asking for a break to programming in a walking day instead of taking a break from physical activity. So that was huge for me. That showed a lot of maturity because students were willing to not just quit and give up on class, but create an alternative, something that they thought that they could do for the day. And it showed in our semester scores. Last one, average modified pacer score. We did see an increase in the average modified pacer score, which again I was proud of. Not shocking to me because like I said, for some odd reason, students love to do the modified pacer as well as the traditional pacer when we're in school. I do it with them. I report my scores to them as well, just so they can see that it's something I'm excited about as well. It's one of my favorite running tests, so I am happy to see that we did have an increase in the modified pacer. Also, because we do have a lot of students from challenged areas, this was the most realistic test for my students, I think, because a lot of them live in apartment complexes, small lots where really the only thing they could do was set up a tiny little 20-meter course and perform as many laps as they possibly can in that 12-minute span. This just became the most realistic and the most safe test for them, and it showed an improvement, and I'm very happy with that. So we've gone way too long. Like I said, I just wanted to give you the breakdown of the data for fall. I've already started crunching the numbers for January and February. It's not looking great, but remember, it wasn't looking great at the beginning of the fall semester either. And I like to break up my semesters when it comes to high school because I think they're very reflective of one another. A lot of times students will start their fall semester the exact same way they start the spring semester because of that large gap in time off. And I'm already seeing those decreases in scores from the averages last semester. And this just gives evidence to the fact that maybe we need to start doing some off-season training for our students when they go home, just to keep them engaged, not just academically, but physically, right? So I will report back at the end of this semester. I want you all to stay engaged, stay passionate about fitness, and we're going to keep progressing and moving forward. Thank you for being with me. Once again, this is Physical Education with Coach. I am Coach Cullen Carroll, and I hope you have an amazing day.